נורא לאט, ונורא יפה, ונורא בשקידה. And I'm sure this helps him integrate mindfulness into his everyday tasks.
It's my Alzheimer's machine. It prevents Alzheimer's.
So I'm very happy and graciously welcome Luang Por Viradhammo and his assistant Kun Ribul, who goes with him and from Thailand on most of his trips around the world. And we welcome you to Israel and the Tel Aviv Dhamma group. Thank you. And it's all yours, sir.
All right, thank you. How's that?
I think they want you to eat it.
Yeah, yum, yum, yum.
Okay.
Is everyone all right at the back? Can you hear me? Yeah? All right? Good, good. Okay. No? All right. How's that? I mean, I'm right in it. Okay, how are you? Everyone in the back, you raise your hand if you can hear me. Okay? If you need more volume, let us know. More volume?
Yes.
Okay, so Mr. Volume or Mrs. Volume, whoever you are. One, 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 2, 2, 2, 3, 3, 3. Can you hear me? Hello, hello. That's better, huh? That's got more juice. How are we doing? At the back? You're good? All right. Voila. Thank you. In our Buddhist tradition, usually if a bhikkhu gives a Dhamma talk, I introduces it with the Namo Tassa, which is a formula of respect and veneration for the Triple Gem, Buddha Dhamma Sangha. So I'll do that first, and then I'll see where we go from there. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So good evening. It's lovely to be with you, and thank you for the invitation to come. The group here in Tel Aviv translated a book of mine into Hebrew, which to me was such an exotic thing. Hebrew, really? And so I've always wanted to visit the group here in Tel Aviv, and I have a friend who is working in Jordan, and he invited me to visit. So I thought, it's in the territory, and so here I am. The topic which I suggested was Dhamma and stress. And I realized that your society is going through stresses that I probably haven't experienced. The depth of problems which you're facing right now I've never faced those kinds of problems socially that you're going through. So I'll give it a go. But if I'm naive in any way, or I'm just naive about things, and please forgive me. When I think about Dhamma, I think about stream of consciousness. So let's say someone comes to the monastery and breaks into the monastery and steals the donation box. And then I find out the next morning. So there's two ways we look at the teaching. One is the social component of the teaching. So in the social component, I have to do something. I phone the police, I put more locks on, whatever I need to do to address the situation of a robbery. But when I think about Dharma, I think about stream of consciousness. So in this event of being robbed, my mind will react or respond in a particular way. I'll get angry, I'll get annoyed, I'll be indifferent, I'll feel disappointed, I'll think about it, I'll think a lot about it or not. And that would be stream of consciousness. So I could be aware of my responsibilities, and also it'd be obviously very, very important to know how my mind is reacting to this. And so when I think about Dhamma, I think about stream of consciousness. And not only can I feel, let's say, angry at what has happened or irritated, I can be aware of that, right? I can be aware of it, or I cannot be aware of it. And if I'm not aware of it, then I become it. So if I feel angry, and I don't see anger as an object, then I become the anger, I become the subject, the angry person. So stress is, on a Dharma level, on a social level, stress changes. So let's say you up the ante, you make something more serious. Let's say I'm out on the street, and then someone grabs me and robs me. Nothing to rob, really. I don't have anything. But as an example, they try to rob me, beat me up a bit. Then the stress levels are much, much higher, obviously. So then I make a report to the police, and maybe I have to go to court or something like that. But stream of consciousness is still the same practice. So now I notice I'm really frightened, or have a lot of memories, or I feel really resentful, or I have even more fear next time I go outside. But it's still stream of consciousness. I can still be aware of fear as an object. I can still be aware of anger as an object, or not. Or not. I can get caught up into it and become angry and become fearful. Much more difficult. So when I think of peace, then I think of two things. And peace is that which is beyond stress. So two things in my own spiritual life are important. One is an idea of background and foreground. So let's, an example. I was teaching somewhere, I can't remember where. Anyway, we were a bunch of people sitting together in silence, and an ambulance, the siren of an ambulance started to arise. It was coming. It came into close proximity. It became louder, 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 and then it receded and went away. So the experience of sound took place in awareness. And that awareness, to me, is a background. And awareness, to me, has no quality. The awareness knew the sound. The awareness knew the quality of the sound. It knew that the sound had depth perception. It was loud. It was softer. It had a certain tone. So there was a changing audio experience that came and went. But awareness did not come and go. Awareness is the background, or knowing or consciousness is the background. And that background, for me, is, and I think for all of us, is silent and peaceful. But we tend not to attend to the background. We tend to be caught by the foreground. And the foreground, in this case, would be, I mean, it's a silly example, but I wonder where the ambulance is going, and that's really, really loud. It's disturbing me. That would be me attending to the foreground. But if I just notice that in this experience of sound, there is something which is changing, the foreground, sound, and there's something which is unchanging, the background or awareness. Then I start to reflect that if I can regard or know the background more, that's where I can find peace. The foreground is never peaceful. It is circumstantially more peaceful than at other times, but the background is always there, it is always silent, and it is always available. Problem is we are not available to the background because we are caught up in the foreground. We're caught up with thoughts, with emotions, with worries, with whatever we want. Right? So it's actually, for humans, it's quite difficult to attend to the background because of the intoxicating nature of the foreground, the compelling nature of the foreground in various ways. If you look at something like worry, worry is a very compelling cycle of thinking. It is the foreground. It's very hard to jump out of the cycles of worry because usually we worry more. Worry begets worry, but that's still the foreground. So in terms of peace, for me, the way I practice this teaching is I do very simple things sometimes. I'll be in nature, and I'll just listen to bird sound. It's very calm, very peaceful. And then I'll say, there's the sound, that's changing, what's unchanging? That's a very simple exercise you can do all the time. Now, up the ante to something which is very loud and raucous and difficult, it's more difficult. But if I've trained in knowing the background, then if something gets more stressful, then I can say, oh yeah, but that stress is taking place in the foreground, but the background is not stressful. And what is stressful? Stressful is when I get what I don't want, or I can't get what I want, right? That's stress. So the sound becomes something which is very, very unpleasant. I want the pleasant, I don't want the unpleasant. That's stress, not getting what I want or getting what I don't want. Now, if my spiritual refuge is always the foreground, I'm toast. There's no way I'm going to be peaceful because the foreground I don't have control of. Sometimes I do. I can close the windows. I can put on headphones. But you know, life is just not in my control. A little bit, not much. So if I then see that I have to take care of the foreground, I have responsibilities, I got beat up, I better go to the police. Yeah, I have to participate in the foreground. But the foreground is not a refuge. The foreground is not spiritual, it's worldly. It's the worldly situation which we're all in, and we're trying to do our best within that. But the background, to touch the background, where do we touch that? Sometimes we touch it like I was in Wadi Rum, yeah? Wow, I've never been in desert, but the serenity and the silence of the desert, And first thing I thought, let's do a retreat. Let's do a retreat in this desert. And that's when we touch the background quite often, because it's not about the desert. It is about the desert, but it touches something which isn't driven by the foreground, which isn't driven by thought or a fascination or intoxications of whatever. We touch it sometimes with art or with music in different ways, where the mind realizes silence. Because the silence is always there, you know. It really is. But we are so preoccupied with the foreground. So then in terms of stress, getting what you want, not getting what you want and getting what you don't want is a Buddhist way of thinking about stress. So it's the letting go of wanting. So these are very, very simple examples of very easy things. But when the situations become very complex and the foreground becomes very disturbing or very frightening, then it's very, very hard to witness that. It's very, very hard to witness it. So that brings me to a kind of second idea that I use in my own spiritual practice. It's the opening of the heart. Now, I think for most Buddhists that I know is we just think too much. We're just so head-centered. Or maybe you're not, right? Maybe you guys have got it better off than me. But Ajahn Chah would say to us, you know, you Westerners, I mean, you're almost the same as us, except you got big noses and you think too much. Weeborn, you got a small nose. And it was true. You know, I'm an urban person. I read a lot, read too much, and very, very complex ideas and analysis. So much of my early life was just lived in the head with analyses and so on. But it really, really didn't make me any happier. It never really brought peace. And it was an addiction to the foreground, manifesting as sometimes conceit of views or worry or whatever. So I began to see for myself at some point, I think about my second or third year, I began to see, no, I've got to figure out how to get out of the head, as we say, you know, literally get out of the head. And I began to deliberately try to bring my attention from the cerebral realms down into the heart chakra. And I found it tremendously difficult. Not that I was a cold person, I was quite a warm fellow, I think. But the dominant habit was thought. And then if I tried to get rid of thought by doing anapanasati or doing breathing or doing metta bhavana, the emphasis was still on the foreground and getting rid of something. So it never worked. So then I'd be fiercely meditative and then sit there hour upon hour and try to watch my breath and get rid of thought. Now, absolute disaster. And I would just shake my head. And I go to Ajahn Chah, he says, 5 years. What do you mean 5 years? I said, you've never trained your mind. You're trying to get enlightened tomorrow. You think you're going to be the Buddha in a month, but your mind's a mess. Which was true. But I never trained the mind. So then I began to see it wasn't about control, it was about awakening. And that doesn't sound like much, but Ajahn Sumedho was so very, very helpful in pointing that out. He said, you have to learn how to awaken to the end of thought, as opposed to trying to get rid of thought. Because he said, thought's not constant. It seems constant. It seems constant. And so he would say, like, if you're worried, then think a worrying thought. Think it through to the end. What am I getting anywhere in my practice? And then stop. And notice no thought. Notice the mind without thought. So he kept encouraging me to notice that there's a gap in thinking. There are spaces. And I began to see thought as more of a movement that came and went. But also I began to see, as I went more into my body, into the heart, I saw, wow, I've got a lot of fear. And that's probably the main personality trait that I have had to deal with this lifetime is fear and anxiety. I was a super shy guy. If I had to do this like 30 years ago, I'd have to go to the toilet about 20 times beforehand. I was so afraid. And so Ajahn Chah made me teach. Ajahn Sumedho made me teach. Well, thanks a lot. Now, I was really, really frightened. But he said, don't worry about the talk. Start to focus on the fear. So, of course, I wouldn't listen to him. And I think, oh, I'm going to say this, I'm going to say that, I'm going to say this, I'm going to say that, I'm going to say this, I'm going to say that. Then I'd have to give the talk and my mind would freeze. Now I get silence. So I began to say, I've got to awaken to fear. And how can I awaken to fear? Not through thought. And I began to see that fear is lodged in my hara and in my heart. And I'm going to see how closed that was, how very, very closed that was. And again, I wasn't a bad person, but that conditioning in me was so strong that that's what drove the worries, that's what drove the thinking. So I began to change my practice from one of some kind of samadhi practice to awakening to the body. Just very simple body meditations. I would do yoga. I would put tiger balm on my chest, try to feel my heart chakra, do all kinds of stuff, and just become more aware down in the body, down in the heart. And I found that so, so helpful. And yet, the fear was very, very real. I'd have panic attacks, you know, the whole 9 yards of that. And Ajahn Chah said, well, that's your karma. You've just got to learn how to bear witness to it. And that was a very important insight where he said, you know, love is bearing witness to the unbearable. And for me, the fear was unbearable. And yet, I was safe. People were kind to me. There was no logical reason for me to be afraid. It was beyond logic, but I was afraid. But I was safe. So that's different, right? I was in a safe environment where I could witness to the fear arising in consciousness. And he said, you know, is everyone aware of metta bhavana, the practices of loving kindness? Loving kindness is not liking everyone. It's having a loving relationship to that fear. Oh, okay. And of course that made sense because I had to now open my heart to something that I had closed my heart to. Made a lot of sense, actually. It was very difficult to do. So then I saw that those situations which, and this is my own predicament with fear, you'll have a different, you know, set of circumstances that you deal with, but this was the big one for me. I began to see that my sense of self-consciousness or fearfulness was a chance to open up the heart chakra. It's the very thing that threatened me was the very thing that allowed me to open up my heart. So I'd like, you notice the outfit I wear. You know, this is not the outfit you want to wear if you're shy. Because when you go to an airport, there's a feeling that everyone's looking at you, and they are. And so I would feel so self-conscious. So I just sit in a busy part of the airport and say, self-consciousness feels this way. I'd awaken to the feeling of self-consciousness, which is not a thought. It's a visceral experience of fear. I'd do it again and again and again, or giving talks. So the last panic attack I had was a doozy. It was in New Zealand. It was after my dad had died, 1988, I think. And I had to give a talk to a large ecumenical meeting. And like 200-300 people in a cathedral. And I get a panic attack. I can't even function. I have to give a talk. So, okay, I dragged myself up there. And I gave a talk which was quite aggressive. It was a peace meeting. But when you're fearful, you just got to get something out. So then I was really aggressive. It was like a totally disaster. And the Tibetan monk I was staying with, he said, you know, Buddhism is about peace. Oh, God. But I did it. You know, I went through the fire. I went through the difficulty. I faced it. I felt it. Oh. And that was the last time I had a panic attack. So, but all the time, I realized this subsequently I was opening my heart. I was opening my heart to something quite difficult. And then I found from that, attention to fear, the welcoming of fear, the knowing of fear or anxiety, that began to actually produce more love. Not in a kind of romantic, silly kind of way, but just in the openness of human relationships and to myself too, And that's been really wonderful, a kind of surprise where not only has the tendency to fear and anxiety pretty much gone away, but the openness of the heart has been the result of that. Whereas you'd think that fear is my enemy. You don't want that fear. Get rid of the fear and have love. It doesn't work that way. You have to have love for the fear, if you see what I mean. And so I found that the more embodied my life, my spiritual, what would I call it? My home ground. My home ground, I found, those were the two things. The background, the silence of the background, and the open heart is how I look at refuge. You know, we talk in Buddhism about refuge, And that's a very visceral and real thing. So then go back to stress. If I can then deal with stress at a social level, okay, that's something. But at a Dharma level, if I'm in contact with the heart chakra, if I'm in contact with the hara, and constantly, you know, it's not just a one-off pranayama practice, but it's something that's always very, very alive, then as I start to stress up around some social situation, I've got a better chance of not attaching to the stress and letting it go there. But oftentimes in life, that's not possible. Life just comes at you in ways you're just trying to survive. Then it's very important to take that practice home. That's why we have monasteries and retreats and places where you can now process what happened last week or last year and begin to allow that to become conscious, to allow it to come up into conscious. Consciousness is the, Ajahn Chah used to say, consciousness is the escape hatch. It releases it. And that releasing is not pleasant. It's not pleasant at all. When you have to witness something that was a simple one, let's say. Don't do it much now, but at times in my life, I have said things to people which were very unfair. I'm pretty good at not doing it anymore. And then I've said things which are unfair out of mistaken perception. And then I've gone back and I've realized, oh, that was cruel. That was not just. That was not kind. It was coming from not a good place. I know it for myself. It's not self-disparagement. I mean, I can do that too. But in this case, I know mea culpa. I've done it. Now, when I have witnessed that, it's such an unpleasant feeling that I don't want to witness it. So I go to thought. And what kind of a thought do I go to? You idiot Viradhammo. You're pathetic. You've been a monk for 20 years. You're still doing that. And that is not really awareness, is it? It's aversion. And I found it really, really interesting that it was easier to hate myself than actually feel remorse. It was a more comfortable feeling to beat the heck out of myself and say, you're pathetic, Viradhammo, you're hopeless, you're no good monk, as opposed to feeling the remorse. Because the remorse was, yuck, I don't want this. And yet the remorse was love, wasn't it? Because remorse is not guilt, is it? Guilt is thought. Guilt is ego. Guilt is self. But remorse is, hiriyottapa, is a very wholesome emotion because it's saying to me, you don't do that. Don't hurt people. It's not a good thing. And then as I worked through those situations, I would say, I would welcome the remorse. It was difficult. But as I welcomed it, again, it opened the heart. Because that's what the heart does, if you can accept that. And so I saw that going to the thinking process was oftentimes just the wrong place to go. Thinking is okay if I'm designing a rug or thinking about making a piece of furniture and so on. It has its place, but not here. So in some like I was thinking about the stresses I've had. I was thinking about October 7th. I've never had anything close to what happened here, so I can't speak to that. But I was thinking about what was the most extreme sudden stress that I felt, and that was I was teaching in Toronto. My mom and brother are living in Ottawa. I'd finished the retreat. I was about to go on a flight to Ottawa, and I got a very short message that my brother and my mother were in a car-train accident. My only relatives. My mind just went bonkers. It just went berserk in worry. I had no choice. All I could do was walk back and forth. It just was so in a panic mode. And I just walked back and forth, and it was okay. In the end, it was okay. My brother had a broken shoulder. My mother had a broken shoulder, and the car got wiped out and so on. That was a long story. But that was a surprise. So sometimes these sudden shocks, when you get, what do we call it? blindsided, blindsided by the mind goes into shock. It goes into shock. And that's where we need kalyanamitta. We need friendships and places where we can somehow negotiate the shocking nature of life's experiences. Then I was casting back into, I live a very benign life, so like to even say I have stress is an insult. But there you go. I got to talk about something. But then I was thinking about, I was the senior monk at Amaravati, which is our big monastery, and I got totally lost. My psychological bearings got quite light, and I got really burnt out, really burnt out, such that I needed to kind of go away and do a long retreat. And during that time, a lot of resentment came up, a lot of feelings of self-hatred, self-disparagement, so I could understand what burnout was. So we have so many levels of stress, right, that I can't speak to them all, but each whatever way we experience it that way. So the more I think we can cultivate refuge, cultivate places in our hearts and minds where we can witness the stresses of life, the more we're going to be well served. And then in those situations which are seemingly impossible, we really need friendships to talk through these things. But if we perpetuate feelings of fear and anger through thought, then of course we're going to have to deal with that eventually, right? You don't get away with anything. So guarding the mind from the perpetuation of these deep felt things is the way of witnessing. It's not the way of saying that you shouldn't feel that. Saying you shouldn't feel something is not Dhamma. If I feel fear, I feel fear. To say that, like say, going back to my example of fearfulness, Ajahn Amaro, the abbot of, I ask all monks, do you feel fear when you give a talk? So I asked Ajahn Amaro, some of you might know him, the abbot of Amaravati, did you ever feel fear at talks? He says, no, I love it. He just loves the stage. Really? And then I asked Ajahn Sucitto. He says, no, I love it too. Oh, okay, so we're different. So I could say to myself, I shouldn't have fear, but that's not Dhamma, that's self. I have what I have. I have to work with what I work. And the capacity to awaken to these things is really the Dharma of these ideas of refuge, the idea of witnessing, the idea that my entry into Buddhism comes from the statement the Buddha makes is there is peace, there is the island, there is refuge, there is Nibbana, there is that is possible, and that is something within me, and I experience those kinds of things from the sense of background, silence, and the open heart. So again, these are the stresses I've experienced. You have your own. But anyway, I think that some ideas that maybe you can contemplate and consider, and maybe we could open to questions. Would that be useful? Yeah? Yeah, so the question is, fear, and how do you open the heart to fear? How do you practically do it? So my initial instruction was welcome it. So I would go to Luang Por Viradhammo, and I would be doing all the practices. And he'd say, no, you're just trying to get rid of it. You're doing mindfulness of breathing to get rid of the fear. You're doing metta bhavana to get rid of the fear. He says, no, you've got to welcome it. So then that became quite simple. It would come up, and I would just use the word welcoming. And then I use the word welcoming to try to get rid of it. You know, that's what the mind's always going to do to you. So, but the intention was there. And then just simple body awareness. So I developed exercises of really literally going from the, you know, when you think, there's a lot of pressure in your head, right? You feel it. And so I just began to try to, I think I was doing some Ujjayi pranayama or something like that. So I would try to bring my attention literally from my head, through my throat, into my heart, into my hara, just very physical, again and again and again. I would then question, like if my mind was being driven by worry, I would say, where's that in the body? And over time, where's that in the body became second nature. In the beginning, where's that in the body? Well, I think it's up here, and I'd just be thinking again. But then, no, what does it feel like in the chest? What is it like there? Then I would do, I'm just kind of casting back, right? I would do metta bhavana, but from the chest. So I would do, first of all, I would do anapanasati, mindfulness of breathing, at the chest. So I'd feel the chest rising, falling, rising, falling, rising, falling, and get some physical attention, awareness at the heart chakra. And then I would visualize my mom, my dad, friends, and I would say, like, I'd bring him into the heart. Mom, may you be well. Mom. So I developed metta bhavana at the heart. Rather than the teachings on loving kindness, which were very list-oriented, you know, you do this person and that person and then the opposite. I say, oh, wow, that's a lot of thinking. So that didn't appeal to me. But what appealed to me was something quite direct that I could love. So when I thought of Mom, then I could very easily have a feeling of love towards her. And so that became a very pragmatic way to become more aware of the loving nature of the heart. And then that became a way of me seeing when the heart's closed. So then I began to have a contrast. And I used that a lot. I used pictures a lot. So I'd have a picture of Ajahn Chah, a picture of my mom, or whatever, or I like Sri Ramana, or, you know, I love saints. So there are all kinds of pictures around. But then I look at the picture and then feel, I try to bring it to my heart, thank you. I do a lot of gratitude practice. I remember Ajahn Chah. I say, Ajahn Chah, because I really love Ajahn Chah. He's a beautiful being. So Ajahn Chah, thank you. Ajahn Chah, thank you. So that was a very visceral way to get in touch with the heart more open. So that when it closed, I had I work a lot with contrast. So then, oh, that's the closed heart. So more and more awareness then here. But also hara. And I saw that fear can be very much down in the hara. And I also learned to bring attention there. And then I began to see, and I'm sorry to talk so much about fear, but he asked, right? So I began to see that my breathing channel had become quite shallow, right? So it was very, very deep. And as I contacted more and more fear, I said, no. And I began to see that my breathing was affected by the patterns of fear. And I didn't push the breath, but I intuited that deep breathing was a way of releasing fear. And I began to do a lot of yawning, interestingly enough. And so the release of the fear was through the breath. The breath channel became bigger, through the development of an open heart, through practical ways like that. So that when fear I began more kind of conversant with it, I could go there right away. I could feel that. I could go to the breath, and I could welcome it, and then endure it. Because a lot of it was just endurance. So then I'd go in the airport, okay, here goes. They're looking at you. Now I don't feel it at all. You know, I'm looking at them. And they're all lovely. But it was very, very real. And so I would just keep using self-consciousness sphere as my major object of awareness, rather than something intellectually abstract or that didn't fit my life. And that's what you want to do, right? Your biggest enemy is your biggest teacher in that spiritual sense quite often. Okay? All right. In the back, please.
What about hatred and revenge?
Say again, please.
What about the feelings of hatred and revenge?
I didn't.
Hatred and revenge.
Revenge. Well, they are feelings, right? So let's say a feeling of resentment or revenge arises because of very real circumstances. And it's a powerful feeling. And it has, it's valid. It's not invalid. It's not wrong. It's very, very valid. So it comes up. It's triggered by memory or events which trigger memory, and so on and so forth. And then that pattern creates thought. And that thought is obviously vengeful, revengeful. Now, in the same way, if one can witness the difficulty of that feeling and not go to the thinking, then one was beginning to witness the object rather than become the subject which is thinking revengeful thoughts or hateful thoughts. And then the power of the revenge or the hatred depends on the power of the pain that's been done to you. So that's very, very difficult work. But if one doesn't do the work, then the patterns of thinking become embedded in revenge and hatred and get stimulated by that. So it's actually very hard spiritual work to do. I was just reading something by, I hadn't seen her before, Etty Hillesum, in Amsterdam. She lived and she witnessed the Holocaust. And in that she says, even if the stormtrooper kicks me in the head, I will look at him and think, where have you come from to be so cruel? To me, that's wow. I mean, I don't think I could do that. But there's an example of a human being who has refused to hate. And whether I could, I couldn't speak to that. But certainly if I realized that if I just keep with the hatred and the revenge, I'm never going to be free. And that's not excusing things which are inexcusable. It's not about that. That's another realm. Things which are inexcusable. Wrong, they're wrong. But here it's just about, if I'm talking about the Dharma of stress, it's about stream of consciousness and taking responsibility and working with that. And that's hard work. And again, it's not a statement that you should not feel those things. That's not what we're doing. It's awakening to what you feel and then trying to work that through. Anything else? Yes, sir.
Most of the Dhamma talks that I listen to are focused on feeling good.
On?
Feeling good.
Feeling good, okay.
Through practices, through cultivation, all kinds. Some of the Dhamma talks touch more issues in realms like the unborn.
Right.
And created. Ajahn Chah talks a lot about
Unborn.
universal consciousness.
Right.
And I wanted to hear from you, how do you cultivate that part in you?
That part of me, that's the background.
That is, in a way, it's not emotional.
No.
This is the spiritual.
It's the background.
Yeah.
So when I talked about those two ways, the background is the unconditioned, the uncreated, the originated, the unborn. And the more I can intuit that and trust that, I do see that it's always there and always available. The practice I have to do is I have to become available to the background. And desire is the preoccupation with the foreground. So the problem is preoccupation. Rather than the foreground being right or wrong, it's kind of like looking in the right place. If I'm looking for the unconditioned in the condition, I'm just in the wrong ballpark. But if I see that all conditions arise and cease in awareness, then I start to turn attention inwards and say, well, what is awareness? And then there's no answer. There's only silence. And if I trust in that, it's an interesting one because the question is the answer. And what is awareness? And there's awareness. And if I trust in that, which is hard if you're...
What do you mean trusting that?
Well, what is trust? Trust is... he uses that a lot. Well, put it the other way, that I don't trust in the analytical mind. That's maybe an easier way to look at it. You might have heard his great story when he was in Amaravati. He was contemplating consciousness and how that's used. And he said, okay, Amaravati, have you been to Amaravati? No. Anyway, he was in his kuti and he was going to go to the library and look up consciousness. So he's marching on his way. I'm going to look up consciousness. He says, wait a minute. This is consciousness. He turned around. and so it's very much, perhaps we could approach it this way. One of the important things I think in the way Luang Por Viradhammo teaches is to see doubt as an object. Now, when doubt arises, it's a very difficult, it's part of the foreground, right? But it's actually difficult to see because we want to alleviate doubt through an answer, through thought. But when you see doubt as doubt, and you can just witness not knowing, then you're not drawn into the desire for an intellectual solution. And that takes you beyond thought into the unconditioned, and you trust in that more than in your doubting analytical mind. That was a very important insight for me. When he said, no. Doubt is an object. It arises and ceases in awareness. The problem is not getting an answer, because I was very invested in thinking. My dad said to me, when you think, when you've read more, you'll know more. So I'd read these difficult, Kant and Hegel and feel really stupid. So they just confused me totally. And then Ajahn Chah said, no, you're trying to realize the unconditioned through conditions, through thinking. So I think that's an interesting way to approach it, to trust in no thought. Not to get rid of thought, but to trust in just the pure knowing without... it's like unfurnished consciousness. Before you put all the IKEA furniture of views and opinions in there, it's just unfurnished awareness. Or like in the Bahia Sutta, in seeing there's just seeing, in knowing there's just knowing, in seeing then you will see beyond ego and so on. Does that help? Yeah? Okay. Please.
I noticed, especially since the war began, but that when fear is on, when it's working, then people tend to see more in black and white, us and them, good and bad. And I also noticed, as per you said, like, that if we do the job of witnessing fear, it dissolves. But when talking about two groups which are actually one, and I feel like this could be a long-term individual process. But instead, if we're looking maybe through our humanity within those sensations, maybe it's possible to shorten the time of the self-work in order to create a shared experience and eliminate some of the fear.
Well, that work would happen when the more free you are, right? The more you could participate in that kind of work. So the more you could see that like in stream of consciousness, if I have a bias towards you, that prevents the abiding in the silence and the opening of the heart. And if I saw that mechanism and I could actually go beyond that mechanism, it's a very difficult mechanism, then I could relate in the complex social situation the best I could. But maybe no one would listen. And maybe, but that's all right. I could do my best. But if I don't do this work, then that aspect of othering in that becomes dominant. And then and reasonably so, I'm not saying it's wrong, but the spiritual work does require letting go of self-identity, but not being irresponsible. It's not like some kind of vacuous emptiness. I just walk around like some tortoise or something, like I don't know what. But actually there's a kind of fullness of heart and participation in life with compassion and intelligence when those biases are gone. So the whole realm of views and opinions, right, is so conflicting, but it's not wrong to have a view or an opinion, but when it brings forth in me a hatred of you or the need to dominate you or get rid of you in some verbal way, then, and if I'm watching stream of consciousness, no, that's not going to be productive for me or you, and that's responsibility. But again, it's very, very difficult work. And then if you're around the cooler and everyone is churning up hatred, then you know, it's even more difficult. So it's not being goody-good, is it? It's doing some very, very difficult work.
So my question was, if you think, and I think you answered that you don't think it's possible to, in a group where people maybe don't do the self-work right now, but they are interested in a way to bring them to somewhere on a mutual ground, it wouldn't help to like display our humanity in the feelings of fear and the feelings on a certain point, on a certain meeting.
Give me an example. I'm not following this.
If you're taking two groups that sees each other as two groups, you
All right.
and them, and they are sitting together, and I ask them to share their experiences through what fear feels like, not the words, but the feeling.
Right.
Then they see the shared experience through their humanity. So I wonder if it's maybe a tool available for us to use.
Well, for sure. If you can get anyone to awaken to fear and take responsibility for it, that's very good work. I mean, it's very, very good work, because then there's going to be an honesty of communication from that. But you know, you have to have people want to be willing, you know, and the willingness sometimes is too painful or whatever. Yeah? Okay. Please, that lady in yellow.
You talked about the body feeling when you have a sensation, then to go to your whole body. But what about if your body is in pain and it disturbs your mind, it disturbs your judgment? How do you feel?
What kind of pain would you say?
Any medical pain?
Like you have a heart condition or something like that. So are you talking about like how do you deal with chronic pain?
Yes.
That kind of thing?
Yes, but how, because when you are in big pain, you are not in your judgment, is not quite clear.
Because of the pain.
You are thinking because of the pain, yes.
Yeah.
So you are not taking right decisions.
Right. You're confused by the pain.
Your body is aching.
So I guess I could speak to, let's say, have you heard of Lyme disease?
What?
Lyme disease from ticks? Do you have that? Well, okay, let's say chronic fatigue syndrome or fibromyalgia, that kind of thing. Okay, Lyme disease is something we have in our monastery that's carried by ticks. And 2 of our monks have had chronic Lyme's disease, and it is very painful. Very, very painful in the joints and the bones, and it produces all kinds of symptoms which are confused and so on. And so one of our monks has had it now, 6 years. So it's a chronic situation. And of course I ask him, how do you handle it? And how do you deal with this stuff? He says, I'm pretty healthy. And he says he does foreground, background. So when he can see pain as foreground, he gets kind of like Lyme fog in his mind. It's certainly his concentration is affected, But the more he intuits that the symptoms of this chronic disease, its pain, and sees it as an object in awareness and refers more to the awareness itself, the background, then the pain is less in his face. It is in his face. And so that also comes to the desire to get rid of. So when you have chronic pain, you want to get rid of it. But of course, the getting rid of it is not being aware of it. So you try to get rid of it by using medical methodologies and so on. But in this case, it's not going away. So then like he does a lot of yoga nidra. Do you know yoga nidra? Lying meditation. So those of you who don't have like strong bodies for doing sitting meditation, I really recommend learning yoga nidra, lying down meditation. It's fabulous posture, much underused. I've got bad knees, so I do a lot of yoga nidra. I won't do it right now. But that is a very good posture for chronic, because you're, so maybe I'll just explain how to do yoga nidra. It might be helpful. So basically, it's developing the meditation in a formal posture, which is much easier on the body. And the way I do it is I lie on my back. I make sure that I'm comfortable. I do shavasana, I do corpse posture. I put pillows under my knees so that there's no stress on the small of my back. And then I will get myself comfortable. And then I say to myself, okay, move your body one more time, 10% more, and then make yourself comfortable, and then don't move. So then the instruction not to move becomes a very good body awareness. Because as soon as I've taken the posture, something itches. But I realize it's not life-threatening. So I notice how itching feels like this. Or, oh, the right shoulder could be just a bit better. Discomfort feels like this. So just keep going to awareness. It's like this, it's like this, it's like this. And then the body starts to be quite settled. And that is a very good posture for yoga, for anything really, but it's a very good for chronic pain, because then you're able to get, it's really hard to meditate, right? With chronic pain. So if you have like a meditative practice which is object-oriented, it's really, really hard. But if it's just awareness of phenomena coming and going, that's a really good posture. So then you get the posture and the pain feels like this. And then, of course, with, like, if we talk about chronic pain, there's a lot of mental stuff, like this monk sometimes feels he's not contributing enough. He contributes a lot. We all say, you're great. He says, yeah, I don't really do enough. And you can watch that, the moaning, complaining of the mind. So I would say that kind of body awareness where you know it, it's different than like pranayama or Goenkaji's, what do? You kind of move around, right? You kind of move from point to point to point. There you're focusing on an object. Here you're not focusing on the object. You're aware of objects coming and going. And so it's not so much concentration as open awareness. So that's a very good way to look at that. And the more you can understand that in a posture which you've got time to do, the more you're going to understand it in the office or wherever you work. It takes a lot of learning these things. You know, they're not simple things. How are we doing? Anyone? Yeah, sir, in the back by the door. Yes, sir.
Can you share the story about how you discover meditation and the first days in the monks?
How I became a monk?
Yes.
You up for that? Yeah, how many times have you heard it? Short or long version, right? Abridged version? Okay. I love the story, actually. But, so as a child, I had vague memories of deeply peaceful experiences coming out of a deep sleep. I couldn't identify them, but it was always a background in my own experience of this is what I want. So, and I never really knew what it was, but there was always this background of, well, so whenever I tried to do anything, I would get into it and they say, well, this isn't it. So I was always discontent, actually. And I wasn't depressed, but I try something, well, this isn't it, and this isn't it, and this isn't it. So then I went to university, and that certainly wasn't it. And also there was a lot of pharmaceutical things floating around the university at the time, in the 60s, so well, this is it. But that wasn't it either, as we say. So then I just, I dropped out of university. I was at U of T studying engineering, dropped out. I traveled for about 3 years. And during those 3 years, I lived in India a year and a half. And in that period, I was on my own. I read a book by Krishnamurti. And that opened my mind to the childhood experiences I had. But of course, the next day it wasn't there. And then I was in a conundrum. Well, how do I return to that? What do I do? How do I get a lifestyle? And then an American monk came floating through. I was living in a town called Elmore in the mountains. And an American monk came through. There weren't many Westerners up there. And he talked about the Pali Canon, but he talked about monastic discipline. Now, I was a long hair and listening to Steppenwolf and things like that, right? So I was really taken by monastic discipline. And I think about it, I'm the last guy that should have been drawn to that. But I realized I needed a structure to try to investigate. So we were going to go to, this was 1971, I think. And we were going to go together to Thailand to find he wanted to find a new teacher. He had practiced in Sri Lanka. And he went to Nepal first. We were going to meet in Calcutta. And he sends me a letter that he's disrobed. I said, what? You can do that? He's the only monk I ever met. Then I got kind of confused. Then I drank some bad water. Then I got hepatitis. So I got stuck in India for about another year. I was in bad shape. And then I went back to Europe. My grandfather died. And I went to the funeral. And got a job in Switzerland for a while. And then, at that time, I had forgotten completely this yearning to become a monk. Completely forgot. So I was in the same conundrum I had been in before I read Krishnamurti. And then I decided I wanted to maybe travel to South America. I went up to Hamburg, looked for some boats, didn't know what to do. And I went to the Student Union building, and I found a travel agent, and I said, travel agent, can you give me a list of flights? And the travel agent said, where to? I said, I don't know. And so I got the list, and Bangkok. And I remembered again, which to me is a kind of astounding thing. 2 weeks later, I was in Bangkok. Now, remember, I only knew one monk, and that monk had told me, there is a town called Chiang Mai. This is before the internet. So, okay, I'll go to Chiang Mai. And I flew to Thailand. Then I asked, where's Chiang Mai? And I asked someone, what is the word for Western monk? Prafarang. So I got those two things. Chiang Mai, I got a ticket to Chiang Mai. And then I walked Chiang Mai 3 days. Prafarang, 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 Prafarang. And after 3 days, I found a monk. He took me down to Bangkok, and he organized my ordination. Now, I didn't have a teacher then. And then a month later, I was taken to meet Ajahn Chah, and then I had a teacher. Good story, yeah? I've told that a million times. But certainly, I didn't do this. It's a kind of story that's like, well, how did that happen? I don't get it, but I'm grateful. I'm grateful that it happened. Are we about, oh, yes, sir.
You spoke about witness.
Witness, yeah?
The witness and the background compared to the foreground.
Right.
How does that live together with the no self
Well, the witness, to me, the witness has no identity, although we use the word witness, which sounds like identity. But when I just listen, I don't see a person. There is listening. Like, do this with me. Just listen. Don't comment on the sound. Don't look for a sound. Just welcome the sound. Is there a person listening, or is there listening? I can't find a person. So to me, that's the anatta part. And then the engagement part is the open heart. If there was only witnessing and no methodology or tools for engaging, then it sounds pretty woo-woo. But actually, the heart is a part of my human possibility. So when the heart's open, then the response is according to time and place, not according to self. And Ajahn Chah was really interesting that way. You could be sitting with him and there was nothing there except deep silence. There wasn't a person. There's just this mountain of silence, and it was just so great sitting beside him. And then someone would come into where he was sitting there, maybe a merchant from a local town, and would have a question, and all of a sudden this personality would come up. And he'd be charming or fierce or whatever it was. Merchant would leave, and then there was this deep emptiness. So my intuition around that was personality can arise and cease from the open heart when it's necessary, but it's not always necessary. So personality is a natural function, because I don't know if you know our teachers, we have Ajahn Chah, Ajahn Sumedho, and Ajahn Luang Por Viradhammo, who's the abbot now. They're all different characters and different manifestations, but I always feel they're manifesting from an open and empty heart, empty in the sense of nothing kind of going on in that way. So those are the two ways I think about anatta. That make sense? Kind of? Yep. Yes, please.
So, for me, the biggest source of stress, basically, is just knowing that so many people are going through immense suffering, not far from here, and there's not much I can do about it.
Right.
Can you talk to that?
Yeah, that's real, isn't it? What I do, so I can only talk about what I do. You remember that there was that earthquake flood in Turkey, where like a whole town got wiped out. I think about 3,000 people instantly gone. So I took a picture of a woman who had lost her whole family. And she has a hijab over her head, and she's holding herself. She's like 40 years old, and she's holding herself in this abject sense of loss. Really, really poignant picture. And so rather than reading about all the casualties in that, I would just look at the picture, and then I would go to my heart. Right? And I'd say, yeah, human beings have this. Suffering is like this. And then that opened my heart. But if I went to all those beings and then I worried about them, then I found that that's not compassion, that's thought. And then also I think I've learned over the years that compassion isn't the capacity to fix things. It's the capacity to know suffering. And that was very difficult for me in terms of, not in terms of these great catastrophes, but in terms of counseling people that would come to me. And I think I'm a pretty good listener, and I'd listen, and then I'd feel, well, I have to fix your problem. And anyone who's a therapist knows that's a disaster. You can't do that. But I felt almost obliged. I have to fix their problem. And I saw, no, you're not listening anymore. You're not really empathetic anymore. You're into taking a role of being a being who has to fix things. And that took a while, but then I became a better listener. And I'll do that a lot. I'll take a picture, but I won't overdo it. Because, you know, I realize that my mind can't just take things in all the time, which are so hard to take. But then I'll try to go to the heart and just witness that and feel that rather than go to thinking. So I would just suggest, notice the difference between heartfelt compassion and thought which is driven by, I don't want this to happen to these people. What's going to happen to them? What's their future? So you try to move away from the thinking to the heart. But it's a good thing that you're so open. But we have our limits, as individuals. Bas? Oh, yes, please.
It's on the same theme with the suffering. But what about when it's collective suffering, where everyone is suffering, and you haven't got any tools to ease that suffering? It's not just about having empathy for your fellow man. Everyone's in the suffering.
Well, to me, the best possibility for me is if I address my own contractions, stay attentive to that, and give what I can to the community I'm in. Because if I just do an abstract thing called a whole society, then that is simply in thought. But where I live my life is not an abstract. I live my life with you now, or with whoever I'm with. And if in that circumstance, which is constantly happening, I'm attentive to the contraction of the heart and the opening of the heart, and I have a refuge in that which is peaceful, then I think I can do the best I can, one-on-one. If I have more power, if I'm a philanthropist, then I can do maybe more grand social things. So my social action is building monasteries. That's my activism. Please come. But that's the only thing I could see that is because we intellectualize these kind of problems, but actually that's just thought. Whereas in the heart, this is how much I can do, and that to me is that taking responsibility first, and then working from that. Yeah. Shall we cash in our chips? Yeah. Who's the MC? Boss? One last question, or are we done? Are we good? Please, yes.
How do I cope with self-importance?
With self-importance, with you or your partner? With yourself, okay. Well, it depends how the self-importance manifests in whatever emotional structure it has, but its proliferation would be in thought. So if let's say I'm a senior monk in the monastery. I've been around a while. So let's say I feel entitled. And I think, you guys should respect me. Because I'm the big cheese. And then some junior monk, he's sort of flippant with me. And I say, you little snub. How can you not pay respect to me? Right? So it manifests as an identity, but then it proliferates through thought. So the more I'm attentive to the thinking patterns, but I don't try to get rid of them. And I say to myself, oh, entitlement feels this way. Then I'm aware. But if the thinking comes up that I shouldn't feel this arrogance, I shouldn't be that way, then I go into guilt. And that is one of the big problems of Buddhism, idealism. I have this ideal that I'm the sweet monk, I always love everyone, and everyone, and loving kindness for everyone, and someone kicks me in the head, and yes, thank you very much, and then there's reality. Or that I should never have jealousy, or that whatever it is. And then the idealism creates the tension, the stress, right? So I want the ideal, but the reality is this screwed up mind, or whatever it is. And then I compare that, and that's where I'm not getting what I want, and I'm getting what I don't want. So the object now, the arrogant thought, is something that I'm trying to get rid of, and that's causing me stress. Not the object itself. But when I say, oh, this is a feeling of jealousy, this is a feeling of arrogance, it's like this, then if I trust in that knowing, and I just keep at it, because these are pattern things. They don't just end overnight. I keep at it. Oh, arrogance feels like this. Oh, you stupid fool, you're too arrogant. No, 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 no. Arrogance feels like this. Oh, you shouldn't be like that. No, 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 no. Arrogance feels like this. And then you come to the body, because the body will have tension. Then you slowly, slowly work it out. And then the heart is liberated from that particular tendency. The liberation might take a decade or a year. I mean, that you can't, you can try to negotiate that, but you can't. Like Ajahn Chah said to me, yeah, you might be better in 5 years. Wow. But he was right, he was right. So don't do it as a time-bound thing. Say, no, I'm going to work with this, and it does work. Because, you think about it, you're not feeding, you're trying to get rid of something is feeding a thing. So you're not creating a self-identity with the arrogant thinking. You're saying, no, that's an object in awareness. Then that doesn't feed it. Yeah? Seva? Well, should we do the Karanya Metta? Do we have that? Yeah? A good idea? We have a chant? Did we distribute that? Is that in English or Pali? It's English, yeah? Yeah, just in case I forget. I've been doing it for 50 years, but you never know. That'd be embarrassing. So this is the Sutta on loving kindness. It's some very powerful words in it. He knows it. He's the guy. Are we there? Oh, good. That's a good idea. There's, if you look at the text, you'll see there are diacritical marks. So you see a little arrow below and above. So in theory, the tone is neutral, and then when you hit a diacritical mark below, the tone goes down. Diacritical mark, it goes up. But usually I forget it. Anyway, let's go. This is what should be done by one who is skilled in goodness and who knows the path of peace. Let them be able and upright, straightforward and gentle in speech, humble and not conceited, contented and easily satisfied, unburdened with duties, and frugal in their ways, peaceful and calm, and wise and skillful, not proud and demanding in nature. Let them not do the slightest thing that the wise would later reprove, wishing in gladness and in safety, May all beings be at ease, whatever living beings there may be, whether they are weak or strong, omitting none, the great or the mighty, medium, short or small, the seen and the unseen, those living near and far away, those born and to be born, may all beings be at ease. Let none deceive another, or despise any being in any state. Let none through anger or ill will wish harm upon another, even as a mother protects with her life her child, her only child, so with a boundless heart should one cherish all living beings, radiating kindness over the entire world, spreading upwards to the skies and downwards to the depths, outwards and unbounded, freed from hatred and ill will, whether standing or walking, seated or lying down, free from drowsiness. One should sustain this recollection. This is said to be the sublime abiding, by not holding to fixed views, the pure-hearted one, having clarity of vision, being freed from all sense desires, is not born again into this world. All right, thank you for your attention. See you next time. Forever. What's that? Oh, yeah. We got 100.
70.
Oh, 70. I brought some medallions from our monastery, and I have 70. It's not like I could carry. So I'd like to give them out, or someone could give them out, or where are they? You want to get them? So I think it's more than 70 here. We could arm wrestle. Well, let me give out what we have, and then these were made in our monastery in Thailand for our. Why don't you put it here, or what? You can give them to me. Yeah. Dhamma. So line up or pass it around, or what do you reckon? You're the boss.
Who like it, so maybe just we can line up and
Take a while.
but
They're beautiful.
yes, it will be nice.
Last chance.
Some patience and
Where are you? Okay.
Ariel.
So why don't you start? Come on. There you go. May you be well. Please, anyone? And may you be well. Okay, yeah. May you be happy. May you be well.